Yeah, hi everyone, this is Deepak. I'm a research scientist at Princeton, working with Arnav and others. So today I talk about something, so a work that I've largely done prior to my stint at Princeton. So this was sort of a work that I'm doing with PhD. It's a 90%. The topic is authentication, and I will kind of talk about a new framework that allows us to model different types of authentication mechanisms, study their security, talk about, I guess, into the talk a little about the type of work I do at Miston. If any of you kind of have a chat with me later, work at the intersection of cryptography and systems. ZK login was one of the projects I worked on. Those who know about it, is kind of a way for users to blockchains using legacy identities. Also related to authentication, but this talk will be purely about security. Other than that, I also look at things like bytes, so on and so forth. Happy to chat about all those topics post the talk. All that said, let's get into the talk. So we're kind of trying to cast a very broad open statement here. So we're interested in authentication. So what is authentication? It's really so there's a legitimate user of some resource that is maybe you're authenticating to a bank, maybe a website, maybe a blockchain, can be anything. And we are interested in the mechanisms these entities use to authenticate users. Commonly used things like username passwords, mnemonics, or things like multi-sig, two-phase, everything are sort of examples of these mechanisms. Well, why is authentication important? I don't think I need to say too much here because even before blockchains, a lot of resources. People are accessing things digitally, but with blockchains, there is sort of an extra focus now because really your keys are your money, your keys are your identity, and so on and so forth. So that's what kind of motivates us is to look at this problem. If you look up online, what's the best way for you to authenticate, especially in crypto space, you'll find lots of blogs saying use a multi-sig wallet. So what is a multi-sig wallet? Well, basically, you kind of split your key into shares and store these shares differently. Maybe one of these is your phone, one of these is your friend, one of these is your mother, and we define a policy like 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. The idea is that even if one of these gets lost, your underlying thing is not completely broken and you're still somehow secure. But the reality is that the space has been seeing hacks day in, day out, and many of these hacks also are from multi-sig wallets. It's not that the multi-sig has particularly helped, or so it seems. Most recently, I just highlight one. So this is sort of the most recent one by an exchange called WazirX, which was hacked for about $235 million. And again, they were using a non-safe multi-sig wallet, which got hacked. So this story has been happening, every year pretty much. And that motivates us to ask this question: can we do better than multi-sig? Yeah, so it can be anything really, right? I think if you go into the depth of any of you'll find different issues, but basically, it can be implementation to it. I don't necessarily mean just policy. At the end of the day, if someone was able to take the money, it was a hack, right? So in a very broad sense.
I mean, suppose you can implement it correctly.
Yeah, okay. I guess if your question is that, then yes. So I don't think the problem here is an incorrect implementation of multi-sig wallet. It was more that there were other issues around it that caused.
The Ronin, the thing that you have on the bottom right, that was a 5 out of 9 multi-sig, but 4 of the shares were stored in the same machine.
So things like that, yes. I don't think any of this was caused with an implementation issue. All right, so just a brief outline for the talk. I'll start with introducing a model for us to talk about authentication mechanisms and their security. The key feature of this model is have a new metric using which we can say that this mechanism achieves this much security. And that metric allows us to compare and essentially we discover what we call as a maximally secure mechanism. So these are mechanisms that in our model achieve the best security that can possibly be achieved. And then finally, I'll talk about some real-world mechanisms that use some of the features we use to build these maximally secure mechanisms. So our mechanisms are very much inspired by real-world things, as we'll see. And by the way, please do interrupt me a lot because the model will have a lot of new terminology, definitions, yada yada. So please do ask questions as and when they come. So the starting point of our model is as follows: we have two players, a user and an attacker. The attacker basically represents any entity that is trying to act as a user. We have n credentials in this. So this mechanism is using n credentials to determine whether who is the real user. Each credential is kind of very broadly defined. It can be a password, it can be mnemonic, it can be anything. And as I said before, mechanisms again can be implemented either on a smart contract or in a website. These are again it's a very generic definition. We look at what each player knows. So we can say that each credential is in one of four states, depending on which party knows the credential. If it is safe, only the user knows it. If it is leaked, both parties know it. If it is lost, no one knows it. And if it is stolen, only the attacker knows it. Right? So if you create a fresh password, it is usually safe. But over the course of the duration of your password, maybe it gets leaked in a breach, then it's leaked. Maybe you forget it, then it's lost. Maybe your machine gets stolen by an attacker and he knows your password and you don't remember it, and therefore then it's stolen. Right? So it's a fairly simple categorization. And so it's an important assumption here that we assume that these states are public, meaning that everyone knows the states of every credential. Bit of a strong assumption. In particular, oftentimes you may think that if a credential is stolen, for example, there is a period of time where, let's say, the attacker only knows that it's stolen, but maybe the user doesn't, right? So we don't venture into modeling all of that. For now, we are saying that everyone knows all the states of the credential. So it's safe or leaked or lost or stolen, both the user and the attacker know that it is so. And then we can start combining the states. So we call a scenario is basically the full state of n credentials. So we have n credentials. Each credential can be in four states. So a total of 4 then scenarios are possible. And at any given point of time, we are in one of these scenarios. Just a simple example. So the 3 credentials and the user. So as I said above, blue and silver are safe. The green is leaked. So this model is what each player knows basically. And in any given scenario, we can then ask whether a user can authenticate for a given mechanism, right? So if we consider a simple 2 out of 3 mechanism and in this scenario, we can say that the mechanism succeeds because only the user can authenticate. So the goal here is to see if the mechanism succeeds in making sure that only the user can authenticate or not. So in this scenario, the 1 out of 3 fails because all right. So 2 players, a lot of 4 credential states, scenarios, and then mechanism success, right? So now putting all of that together, we can define what I'll call profiles. So these profiles are basically tabulating the complete performance of a mechanism in all possible scenarios, right? So let's take a 1 out of 2 mechanism, 2 credentials. So we have a total of 16 scenarios in the table. And in each scenario, we are putting a tick mark if the mechanism succeeds or across if it fails. Fairly simple. The 1 out of 2 mechanism succeeds in 3 scenarios. Basically, if safe or lost or safe, and then safe and safe. In everything else, the attacker knows one of the credentials and can therefore authenticate. That's why we say that it fails. And I'm using this notation, which is just showing the 3 scenarios. Basically, it's just a set of scenarios in which this mechanism succeeds. So I'll just talk about, I'll just show the profiles of common mechanisms, right? So this is the 1 out of 2 that we just saw. This is the AND mechanism, that you need both, right? So the difference here is that it succeeds in scenarios where one of the credentials is safe, the other is leaked, as opposed to or one which was succeeding in scenarios where one is safe and the other is lost. We can also talk about the one key mechanism, which is basically just use one key and not use the other key, just to compare it with the rest, right? So this one, again, it just succeeds if one of them is safe, but if that is not safe, then it fails. Fairly trivial things, nothing surprising, I hope. But the thing is, we can already start comparing mechanisms, right? We can say things like mechanism X is better or worse equal than mechanism Y, just by looking at their profiles. By that, I sort of really mean this set here. So you can look at the set of scenarios in which it succeeds for any 2 mechanisms and compare those 2 sets. So if the set is a subset of the other one, we can say it is worse or better. If those two are the same, we can say they're equivalent. If those two sets can't be compared, then we can say that these mechanisms are incomparable. Again, just a simple example, if we have these two, we can say that the blue is better than the yellow because it's a superset. It's a small quiz. How many here think that a two-credential or AND mechanism is better in the sense of the word I use, the term better, than using just a single credential? Can we get I guess people raising their hands for those who think yes? So the metric is so this is what I mean by better, right? So something is better than the other if the profile of this is a superset of the profile of that.
They are incomparable if you look at the graphs, but if you start putting priors on, might be the error mode.
Yeah, that's basically the answer. So they're obviously incomparable because those the probability thing is also exactly what you said. So this is from a paper by Tai a few years back. So this shows exactly what you're saying. If you start putting probabilities, you will find some probability areas where the single wallet is more secure than the other two. Right? I won't get into the details of the probabilities, but feel free to check out that paper, which kind of delves into that. But yes, so that's the basic idea, right? Equivalent is just a minor note about equivalence. We can also say that equivalent if you start perverting credentials, so we're okay with that. We're also putting that into equivalence. So here these two are said to be incomparable, right? And so now the point is take any n, let's say n equal to 2 or n equal to 3. So we can start doing this exercise where we take all the n credential mechanisms that are there in this world and put them on a single slide. And start drawing lines between them based on which ones are better than other and which ones are not, right? And what you will get is a graph like this, where there are some mechanisms. So by the way, don't draw a line between them. If there are two mechanisms in this graph where there is no ancestry relation between them, then they are incomparable. So for example, those two will be incomparable, and similarly these two are also incomparable. But you'll start seeing mechanisms that are sitting at the top of this graph, which are basically mechanisms such that there is no other mechanism that is more secure than that. Right? So these are what we call maximally secure mechanisms. And more specifically, we can also find what I'll call a complete maximal set of mechanisms. This set is interesting because basically this is the set any practitioner will care about, in the sense that there can't be any mechanism that is basically given any probability prior. One of the mechanisms in this set will be the best for your probability prior. So this is a set of mechanisms such that you take any other mechanism, it is either equivalent or worse to one of the members in this set. So this is complete in that sense. It is basically the span of the top layer, essentially. Are these two notions clear? The maximum is secure notion. So I think the task is fairly clear. The goal is to see if we can find this, right? And we find maximum mechanisms and this complete network.
So maybe you're not interested in comparing like n credential to an n+1 credential mechanisms?
So the thing is, any n credential mechanism can be cast as an n+1 credential mechanism, where you don't use the one credential, right?
But that's without priors, right? Oh, you're saying
that's also with priors, right? So if you're interested in that, then just look at n+1. So the key idea we'll rely on to arrive at these mechanisms is what I'll call interaction. So what is interaction? I'll explain it with an example. And this is sort of a bank that uses it today, but there's many real world examples where they leverage this pattern. So what they do is something like this. So if you want to add a new beneficiary, send money to, they require you to use both your password and OTP. But the beneficiary addition doesn't happen instantly. Okay, so there's a delay of 30 minutes that they call a cooling period. What's the point of the cooling period? Well, during this period, you can cancel the addition with just showing the password. So why is it helpful? We can sort of think about a simple scenario. So let's say that let's say that the password is safe, but the mobile is leaked. Let's say that the password is leaked and the mobile is leaked. That's a very bad scenario. So even the attacker can add a new beneficiary, but you see the user can use this 30-minute period to delete the beneficiary. So this is basically the intuition, and the key notion of this interaction is to you can also think of it as synchrony essentially. So there is a mechanism, the mechanism is giving some time for the user to respond to a certain thing. And if the user responds, and that is the synchrony assumption here, then things are good. We see this pattern in many places. I'll also talk about a crypto wallet called Argent, which uses this insanely. And by the way, even things like IRS notices are this, right? So if you think about when you receive an IRS notice saying that something bad has happened, call us to see if your identity theft has happened. This is interaction where the IRS is sending you a notice. That's the interaction part. And I don't know if there is a timeline where you have to respond within 3 days before all hell breaks loose, but basically this is sort of a pattern that is seen everywhere. But one that one as I'll show, we haven't formally studied it, and therefore don't know what exactly it gives basically. And bimodal interaction in a fairly straightforward way. We just say, as I said, that we just assume synchronous channels between the mechanism and the user. And just a detail about mechanisms. So for us, mechanisms are just DFAs. We allow DFAs with clocks. These clocks essentially allow us to model things like this 30-minute period where the mechanism needs to wait. But that's just a detail. DFA with clocks is sort of the same as DFAs. So that completes our model. So I can introduce two players, user and attacker, scenarios, which is basically the state of all the credentials in the system. A mechanism is nothing but a DFA, and you have synchronous channels between mechanism and the players. Profile was nothing but a full set of scenarios where the user was able to authenticate, or the user alone was able to authenticate. And then we had these two notions of a maximum and anti-maximum. Those are sort of what we are looking for now. I'll just pause here for a second if there's any questions. All right, let's move into our results then. So the first result we have is an upper bound on how secure a mechanism can be. So what do I mean by that? So we find that the size of the profile set is bounded by this number 4 to the n minus 2 to the n by 2. So n here again stands for n. If you have n credentials, basically this theorem is saying that it can succeed in at most that many scenarios. I won't obviously want to prove it here, but I'll just give the intuition for the lemmas which we use to prove it. And these are fairly, when you read it, it will feel fairly natural. So the first one is just saying that no mechanism can succeed in a scenario where all credentials are stolen. Seems intuitive, right? So there's nothing fairly non-standard going on here. Second one is slightly more interesting. It is saying that if a mechanism succeeds in a particular scenario, then it must fail in its complement scenario, where a complement is defined in a very specific way here. We are basically inverting credential availability. So there's an example below if you're interested. So basically the complement is one where safe becomes stolen, kind of leaked and lost stay the same. So that's, again, it will seem intuitive, but basically these are sort of the two lemmas that allow us to prove that bound on the size of a profile. Just to elaborate a little more, so that bound when n equals 2, it gives you 6. So it is saying that no mechanism can succeed in more than 6 scenarios, right? By the way, we can also interpret the first lemma here, which says that no mechanism can succeed in a bad scenario, as basically saying that no mechanism can succeed in this 3x3 cycle. So really, the interesting parts are this for any mechanism, at least for any two credential mechanism, because those are the ones where at least one of the credentials is safe. So I just put this diagram here to show the count. We found mechanisms, the simple mechanisms that we know of, kind of succeed in 3, and the one given is 4, but kind of nothing succeeds in 6. Basically, one way to prove maximum security is to see if it succeeds in 6, and then it is maximum secure.
So this is 3x3 or fails, right? It seems like 3 to the n, right?
Sorry?
You're saying like this as long as the one person is either stolen or even lost, there's 3 to the n possibility of that.
So in all those 3 to the n scenarios,
why is the 2 to the n there?
So I'm not fully explaining that one. So that one also relies on the second lemma, right? So the second lemma can be intuitively understood as saying something like this. So if something succeeds in this one, then it must fail in this one. That's what the second one is saying.
But it should be 4 to the n minus 3 to the n, right?
If there was only the first lemma, you're right. But even then, I don't know why the by two comes, right? So the full thing sort of also depends on the second level, right? It's my high level point. Yeah, I mean, if it was only the first one, it's just 4 to the n minus 3 to the n, no?
4 to the n minus 3 to the n is the
Yeah.
sign of the line, and this line there are half of them.
Okay, I mean, it relies on it. Basically, the answer to your question sort of relies on the second one here. Check out the paper. So let's sort of get into the maximum mechanisms now. So we discover maximum mechanisms that all follow a very simple format. They rely on interaction. Okay, so the idea is as follows. So basically, any player can initiate these mechanisms, which starts a timer. And once the timer ends, what the mechanism does is it has a winning rule that I'll describe in a bit, that it uses to judge who wins based on just the submitted credential sets. So basically, there is a set from the user, set from the attacker, and this winning rule is just having, you can think of it as a function that takes these two sets as inputs and outputs who wins, basically. So we uncover 3 types of mechanisms that all follow this format that just differ in the winning rule. So the first 2 are sort of very intuitive, and I'll mostly focus on those. Let's start with the priority, right? So as the name suggests, the idea is that you a priori define a priority between your set of credentials. So let's say that violet is greater than silver is greater. And the winning rule that the mechanism applies is that whoever submits the highest priority credential that was not submitted by the other player wins. Just to take an example to make sure that it's clear. In this example, there's no, the user is submitting the highest priority one, and the attacker is submitting something else. Because violet has highest priority, we say that the user wins, right? Now let's take another example where the user is submitting silver one. Now here, since both players are submitting silver, just remove those and then judge them. Then only the attacker is submitting the gold one, so the attacker wins. So again, the idea is to always look at the highest priority credential that is unique, right? So you just remove all the common things and then ask who has submitted the highest priority one. And it turns out that this is the profile of the 2 credential priority mechanism, which succeeds in 6 scenarios. So is maximally secure. I'll explain a little bit about why this is happening. So if you look at all the scenarios in this row here, since the violet credential is of higher priority, doesn't matter what the state of the other credential is, because again there is a timer and the mechanism is waiting, and if it is safe, the user can submit that and authenticate. Now, so in this one again, I think it should be clear because the violet is lost and the silver one is safe. This one also we're good because basically both players can submit the violet one, and the effect of it is gone in a sense. So that's the basic idea of how this priority mechanism is working. And as you can see, it is actually better than all the 3 mechanisms that I showed before in a strict sense. Basically, a superset of all the profiles of the others.
So I guess like in the real world, is it usually easier to steal one than the other? Like, is that the intuition for why this makes sense? Because like if they're all equally easy.
So I want to say that the primary intuition here is the use of interaction on a timer that is giving user the chance to see what that attacker has submitted, and then your point about priority is also important. If you have 2 credentials, there is a natural question of which one you set higher priority to. And that depends on whether you think this scenario is more likely or this one, right?
Well, can you give an example in the real world where like one thing would be, what would you set your?
So the question boils down to which one is easier to steal than so between those, I think, basically. I don't know how to answer that question.
Maybe an example is in the dorms, every room has a key, and then there's a master key that unlocks every room. So
I see. Okay. Yeah, but
I guess to fully answer your question, we probably have to look at a very specific case, right? Passwords and OTPs, which one is hard to steal? My feeling is that passwords are harder to steal. They're easier to lose, they're easier to get leaked, but I feel like they're harder to get stolen. That's my feeling. I'm making no claims. But it sort of depends on that, right? Credential characteristics, basically. So I'll quickly cover the other 2. So as I said, majority is the somewhat more intuitive one. Here, you just pick whoever submits plus most credentials as a winner. You do need to deal with ties where both parties submit equal number of credentials. If there is total 3 credentials and both parties submit 2 credentials, so then you need a way to break those ties. Now there's a lot of tie-breaking functions we come up with. I won't go into them because again, they don't have easy intuitions for why they are there. They're just there. The priority with exception one is also in the similar bracket where it's kind of hard to intuitively explain why this is a thing. But basically it's the same as the priority mechanism, except in one case, which is the case where the last two credentials in the priority vector are submitted by the parties. So typically, if priority is C2 greater than C0 greater than C1, and if one player submits C1, the other player submits C3, in a priority mechanism, you would have said that C3 is the winner. But in this one, you invert that, and for us, for some reason, it turns out that this is also maximally secure. The more, I guess, practically relevant things, right? So if we look at the 3 credential case, again, the same thing happens. So here I'm comparing the 2 out of 3 mechanism on the left, and the majority mechanism on the right. So the 2 out of 3 mechanism, again, this is sort of what the classic threshold or multi-sig wallet, right? So P of 3 is 28, as I said before, majority mechanisms are maximally secure, so that one succeeds in all 28. That one succeeds in 28 scenarios. And the 2 out of 3 one, in particular, if you notice the ones, you'll see that this is actually a perfect subset of the right one. In the sense that it is strictly worse than the majority one. And let's just stare at the ones for a second to convince yourself. But
just to get confusion. So the majority is saying like the user and the attacker are interacting, and then the user will. Are you saying that the user should always give all the credentials? Because you don't know how much the user is gonna give.
Right. That is broadly right. Yes.
Okay.
This also answers Beanie's question. You can see there are cases where upper left, you still have ones.
Okay. So this is a 3x3 thing, right? So here the equivalent of that is the 3x3 cube,
It's only a
which is right, this.
Oh, it's only a face.
Yeah, I mean, to this question, I guess some things are mapped from the face, not to the face, right? And that's like,
Yes.
So that cube is always 0.
no, like the all safe case, for example, is mapped to the all stolen case, which already is in the bed cube, right? In the bed subcube. So you don't want to count this.
Right.
This is why it's -2 to
The majority case is the case that only your key, some of key are being stolen, then otherwise you always can win because you always keep all the keys.
And so it's say it again in
The
the
majority case,
Yeah.
and initially you as a user you have all the keys, and as long as there's no stolen case, you always have all the keys, and then you should always win.
So it depends on the leak, right?
No, I'm saying that either it's leaked or safe or
Lost.
or maybe lost. Either leaked or safe.
Right. So
It's
you're
always
saying that
safe.
as long as things are not stolen, there's no way for the attacker to
Yeah.
gain new knowledge over it.
Attacker
So
can
you're
get
talking
us.
about, I think you're talking about removing the stolen row from everything, right? Then you're saying that these are all ones, which is true. Right?
I guess one rationale behind this threshold-based mechanisms was that adversary can adapt to adjust its strategy based on the mechanism we pick. For example, if you have a priority mechanism where one key is stronger than the others, now adversary is more likely to target that one.
No, that's why I mentioned majority too, because here the priority is not as much, right? So here it's you only use priority for tie breaks, really.
I see.
I guess, but I'm okay.
So this is a little more intuitive, I suppose, in maybe some scenarios. But again, it all depends, right? Once you look at it, the characteristics of different credentials, if they share the same characteristics, then yes, majority seems more natural because you're not giving implicit priorities. But if they have different characteristics, what are these passwords and OTPs, right? They intuitively share different characteristics.
Also, have you looked into like symmetric mechanisms and what you can achieve maximally? Just assuming the mechanism has to be symmetric, like a threshold.
No, I don't think we have looked. Well, so we do, there is one symmetric mechanism here. They have this cyclic priority mechanism. So here you break ties without really giving.
I guess majority is also symmetric. They're reading all the people except the type.
That's what I was saying. Yes.
But I guess the other thing, so one thing is you're giving it different powers, different. It's like you said that's one issue. But like in majority, when it is symmetric, sort of my worry would be usability, but it should also be usability, right? Like you only need to play. But here you're saying like you need.
So
Might be like
there's
everyone-
so to answer your usability question, right? So at least in the mechanism I just described, it's wiser for the user to submit everything because you don't know what the attacker will submit. But it is possible to design mechanisms where, let's say, as soon as the attacker submits something, you add a new timer delay, right? And then as a user, you don't need to submit everything, you just submit one. what you think is safe. And if the attacker responds by submitting something else, so there are ways to mitigate this a little bit, but the usability question in terms of time is still there, right? Compared to 2 out of 3 where everything is instant.
Oh, Srivatsan has a question. Do you know what are maximally secure schemes if you don't have synchrony?
Yes, there is a paper also at CCS by some of the same authors. The high level point is that this is sort of the best we can do in asynchronous, the one shot mechanisms. So Boolean formula, right? So basically, if you have any credentials and in a Boolean formula, and so yes, that's the answer for async. And all right, so just to sum it up, right? So we show that all the 3 priority, majority, and the priority with exception are maximally secure for any n, right? And as far as the complete maximal sets are concerned, so we show that the 2 credential set has just one mechanism. So this is the only mechanism you need to care about in practice if you only have 2 credentials. And security is with both, right? It's just the priority mechanism. The situation for 3 credential is a little more involved. It has the complete maximal set has 14 mechanisms. Most of these come from the type-rating function and the nuances in that. But again, in practice, I would imagine priority and just the simple majority are the ones that are like directly relevant and sort of easy to understand for people to use. And still maximally secure. Now we don't have a way to arrive at complete maximum sets for arbitrary n. That is only for the n equal to 2 and 3 case we have proofs for sort of results showing what the full set is.
But
the only thing I can
whether the bound that is.
Yeah, so I say that these are maximally secure for any n, right? So these already achieve that bound of profile size.
No, the complete.
The complete set. Some sets in that sorry, I know some mechanisms in that complete.
Isn't it just one mechanism sufficient? Why do you need to find all of them?
So the complete maximal set.
If you have one such example for every n, then that's what you
I guess
use.
if you have-
So
If you have priors, sure.
So if you have priors, then the only thing you care about is the complete maximum, right? So you don't know the full set.
So for n equals 4, you only have one example.
For n equals to 4, I know these 3 are maximally secure.
Oh, 3.
There could be others, yeah. Okay, I'll move to the final stage of the talk. I'll talk about some real-world mechanisms that we've analyzed. So in particular, we chose mechanisms that already leverage interaction to some extent in real-world network. Obviously, before going there, I do want to make the high-level point that many mechanisms don't use interaction. Like most people, the ones I show are the outliers, really. Most people either at best use maybe multi-sig or even not that. So I don't want you to take away that this is the norm. This is by no means the norm. The first one is by a bank called HDFC Bank, which was the example I used before to talk about what interaction is. So these are the automata for the HDFC Bank. I won't go into all of it, but I can cover the key parts. So this is the cooling period that I mentioned before, right? So that is what is denoted in that automata there. If you're curious, I'll just talk about a little bit about the notation here. So basically, R0 is saying that the timer T0 is reset. So basically, you can submit P and M to go here and reset that clock. Within 30 minutes, you have to wait at least 30 minutes. So after T0 hits 30 minutes, you can then go from here to there to submit this, right? So that is basically showing what I wrote here in text. Basically, there is a cooling period of 30 minutes, and before that, you can come back by showing the password. After 30 minutes, you can sort of add the new bit. So it is just showing what.
Actually, it wasn't clear. If suppose the action you're doing is change password, then what are you saying? The old password to be used to undo the new password?
Actually, this one is the change password, right? So to simplify, in our automata, we show so the final states here correspond to things like withdrawing money, adding beneficiary, anything that you consider sensitive, or changing password. So here, for example, we just mark this as the final state. So you can submit an OTP. So for this, in their mechanism, you can just submit an OTP to change password, instantaneous process. So they don't have that, which is exactly what we show.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is basically the crux of what we say.
Uh-huh.
The password resets on their website are instantaneous.
Uh-huh.
You just submit the OTP, change password.
That's kind of a hole.
So that is basically what we say. I say the same thing in a way, but basically there are certain scenarios where what Dan said can be exploited. You can use the password reset flows. For example, I talk about a scenario of password safe mobile leak, where you can use the reset flow to change the password, and then add a beneficiary, and the user can't do it. Adding a delay.
Adding a delay where the old password is still active.
Exactly.
And besides password, you also have 4 digit.
You have 3 credentials.
I guess, which means
Using the old password.
Well, because now if the attacker knows your old, no, suppose your password leaked, and now you try to change your password, the attacker could prevent you from changing your password. You change your password, they'll just use your old password to prevent the change.
So you're saying they can cancel a password change by.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that cycle is also interesting. It also comes in some other places. Basically, there was this paper a few years back where they said it was an idea proposed, which was that instead of going around in cycles forever, maybe the amount should be split between 2 parties.
Right.
And probably not going to happen. But I'll quickly cover the second case study we analyzed. We looked at this wallet called Argent. And this one is a lot more complex because they allow people to add new guardians arbitrarily. So you can have, your wallet can have any number of credentials, and then always you have the flexibility to change owner, change guardians, add guardians, remove guardians, everything that you think of. This is basically how their automatons look like. I will not go into the details of it, but I just wanted to give you a sense of a real world mechanism which goes to such levels to use interaction and everything to try to make everything work. I'll just talk about our result in this case. They credit they succeed in 5 scenarios, which is more than what many 2 credential mechanisms do. But of course, the maximum mechanism we have succeeds in 1 more. Anyway, I'll conclude the talk here. If there's one takeaway I want you guys to have, which is that the power of interaction is what allows all of this to happen. And so for all of this to work, we need really robust alert mechanisms so that users can respond to things that are happening in a bank or on a blockchain or whatever it is. Like today, if you look at the type of alert methods we use, it's mostly email and text. And then even within emails, it's sometimes hard for us to judge which one is an alert email. Maybe they're stuck somewhere in your updates or something else, right? So clearly, I think there's a lot we can do to make those alerts surface better for users so that they can.
Or worse, the alert could be spam. Click here to fix your account.
Well, assuming that the source can be authenticated, yes. Right. So one idea we have, another idea we had was to have this notion of a sticky notification, where the idea is that you shouldn't be able to delete an alert email for, let's say, 1 day after it was received. And the idea is that even if an attacker gets access to your phone, they can't delete an alert email. And maybe they get access to your phone for a short period, and sort of you can come back and see that your alert notification was there. So this was this idea of make this notification sticky so that users can see and act on them even if things are bad for a short period. And in terms of the mechanisms and the results, as I said before, I think the priority and majority are sort of the 2 easy to understand and ones that are sort of easy to deploy, and both maximally secure. A lot of future directions. I'll add a few here. So first of all, as I've shown with Argent, some of the analysis of these mechanisms is quite involved because automata are quite complicated. So if we can automate the analysis once put on an automata to figure out the profiles, that would be cool. In terms of other models, right? So there's many models. Asynchrony was something Srivarshan asked. I've put the link here. I've also put the link for the asynchronous work. That is sort of concurrent to this one. So asynchrony means that no alert mechanisms are possible, basically. Partial knowledge is a model where we make the attacker know everything, but let's say the user does not know the true credential state. So maybe the user can't distinguish between a safe state and a leaked state because the user doesn't know what the attacker has, basically. It's sort of a stronger model. We can also think about hidden mechanisms where the user gains the power over the attacker, meaning the user designs a mechanism, and the mechanism is somehow private. So maybe the attacker can only infer about it as the user set, which is sort of which could be a model where let's say we give a bit more power to the user. Economically rational rewards is the example I just mentioned before with the cycles. So that was kind of where that idea came from. And then last but definitely not the least, thinking about usability in terms of what is the most maximally secure mechanism where the user doesn't have to wait? Maybe it is the Boolean mechanisms. I would suspect that that is the answer for that one. But as you can see, there's a lot of different models and work to be done here. So with that, I conclude the talk. I'll talk a little about that one. So that is a website you can go to where you can enter the credential probabilities. And it will spit out the best Boolean formula mechanism for that. It won't spit out the mechanism from the complete mechanism side. So we need to extend that to also spit out the best mechanism in the complete mechanism side. But that is already cool, and if you want to kind of play out the different probabilities. With that, I conclude my talk. Thank you.
Is this used anywhere in Mistin or uses more fancy mechanisms?
I hope. As I talk to people, a couple of things I realized is everyone that is seriously thinking about designing secure wallets has this intuition about interaction in mind. They may already be doing something like this, but as I've shown with my examples, they are not using them in the cleanest way possible. Right? That's especially with the Argent case where they went haywire. So I think there's some really simple insights here that I think all mechanism designers will probably appreciate.
So for that, I'm wondering, is there a resource? Like, I'm just really curious.
Yeah, no, I think that is sort of the big, I would say maybe it's a bit of an user study type question, but how do we determine the probability that a password is safe? Once we have that and plug those here, but determining that for commonly used credentials, it seems like a hard question, but an important question.
So since this design is kind of orthogonal to marketing.
Well, you can also model this with
Yeah, I
this,
mean,
but
it's kind of, you can combine, but it's not only for marketing. I was wondering, just like, if there's more power if you combine this directly with those market signatures.
what do you mean by signature schemes?
Like the first you mentioned in the beginning.
Right, single threshold type
Yes,
things.
it's threshold. Here it seems that all the applications is not quite relevant whether you are using threshold signature or not. For that, you can put all the credentials in your user, adding user. There's no need to use any thresholds.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand because we have a model that is more general, which model is
Yes.
threshold and multi-sig also.
So you are covered for that.
So
So you are saying that.
I guess more specifically, these automated edges can have a Boolean formula of credentials in them, right? So it's
But I guess the point is that even you have this pooling functions credential, but usually it's the user who got all the keys added in single server, right? A single site. Like my phone, I get all the, or myself know all the secrets. Rather than threshold wallets, it's several servers that secret share secret keys.
so these credentials could also be between different parties. For example,
I see.
just to give one example, yeah. So this G here stands for the guardians. Guardians could be friends. So if you are all my guardians, so this is saying that you can submit the owner credential and M by 2 guardian credentials. The way I define a credential is very broad. It's not limiting you to just see.
But I guess one thing that's not covered by this is many of the custodians, what they will do is they will tell you that they have a threshold signature scheme, but they won't tell you the threshold. So you don't know how many people they'll kidnap. This model doesn't really show the benefit of not revealing what the threshold is.
Right, so I hide the mechanism basically, yeah.
But this is not captured in your check marks and X's. What is it? Where is the fact that the threshold hidden?
No, in this world, the mechanism is public.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is sort of what I meant here, but hidden mechanisms, right? So if you hide the mechanism, I guess in that case, it's completely hidden, right? Even if users use it.
That's the point.
Right.
So could you model is there a benefit?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I have a good answer to that, but yes, that is. I mean, yeah, it's hard to believe that it will be more secure in terms of the number of scenarios it will succeed in, but maybe in practice, what you said.
Oh no, I think the check marks and X's don't capture that. There's a benefit.
Right.
Clearly, there's a benefit. It's just
Right. They don't capture that.
Model doesn't, or terminology doesn't capture the benefit.
Yeah.
I guess you assume the priors are independent, right? So
Sorry.
in your tool, you assume that the priors are independent, right? So it doesn't capture, for example, store 4 keys on the same machine.
You multiply probabilities, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there you need to enter it for each key yourself. So
And you just assume that the probabilities are independent.
they are not.
When you calculate, you just multiply probabilities.
I believe so.
There's no covariance matrix.
Yes.
Hello, Johan here. I hope you can hear me. I just had some comments regarding strong authentication with bank security. You might not know me, but I'm actually the one that wrote the TOTP standard, just because I felt bad about no security. So when we talk about bank security, we need to have something that is dependent on the message, the transaction. Otherwise, you can't have it. Regardless how many passwords you have, it will not be enough. You can make it, but complicated authentication is just what my experience is bad authentication. It's not working in practical use cases because you just be a lot of messages to the service desk and the banks will then just remove it. That's the comment I had. Thank you.
So, I mean, if I may respond, the final states we define, they're not black and white in the sense that you can design, you can come up with automatons that where final state corresponds to removing a big amount, right? And that is the only case you care about. And then maybe there you can design mechanisms that are high secure only for that case. Basically, you can have different automatons for different classes of security. That's sort of what you're referring to.
Alan Cobb has a comment. Why is daddy crying? Well, it's not a question.
What was the comment?
We'll
Maybe
do
we'll do that later.
Okay. All right, yeah. Just thank the speaker again.